Hello and welcome to another edition of Humble Theology. My name is John. In this series, we're still looking at the book of Leviticus. We're trying to finish out the book. So as we do so, we have reached chapter 24. And in 24, we're taking a different turn. We're now looking at, it's not so different, but as we looked at in the last few chapters, the cleanliness of the priests, the cleanliness of the sacrifices, and then the holy days, the holidays, the feast days in chapter 23, in which a lot of these things would be celebrated and ceremonies performed. We now reach chapter 24, where there's different items about the celebration of God in the lamps, the tabernacle, the bread of the tabernacle, and things like this. And some case law is going to be carried out. In school textbooks, you'd say, oh, we have a worksheet to do. We have a situation, and how does this work? Let's look at some practical examples in a sense. And that's what the Bible says it is. It held the people in check by faith, that they would be confined by the law as a schoolmaster to train them up in the faith, to guard them, to give them guardrails as to this is what worship of God and this is what following God by faith looks like. Didn't guarantee the faith, but it's guaranteed what faith should look like when there's that inner relationship with God and how it then works itself out. David was a man after God's own heart. Therefore, when he looked at the law, he said he loved it. It was his great counselor and friends to him. He wrote psalms about how it was a light unto his path. It wasn't this burdensome thing that, oh my gosh, I got to follow all these rules and regulations. No, he saw God's will and plan and salvation within them. So he loved them because he knew who gave them. He knew what it was training him to do and to be. So that's what we're looking at. So again, as always, if you haven't read chapter 24, pause here. That's my pause. Go back, read chapter 24, and then join us, start back up, and we'll look at some summaries here. So the lampstands, continually burning lamps, as described here in verses 1 through 4. Basically, we have that, God continually burned as a pillar of fire for them as a people throughout the wilderness. And this idea of the bread of the presence, the bread of the tabernacle in verses 5 through 9, just the 12 tribes, 12 loaves of bread, or you could say from the New Testament, the 12 apostles to come. Indicating the dual nature of Christ and his office as mediator. He is the bread of life. So again, Christ is depicted here, always in communion with his people. A fully always burning lamp. God is always there, always present. His presence is within them. Spiritually, but outwardly, here's this tangible thing to look at, to be reminded of his presence, this continually burning lampstand. And the bread of the presence, these loaves, God people, in a sense, as loaves, are always before him, are always in his presence. He lives and dwells among his people. And yeah, it's a tangible thing. It's a visible sign. It didn't guarantee anything, but as you looked at them, just like you would look at the communion table, and a lot of them say, communion or koinonia or something like that. It's that idea of being in communion or fellowship with God. God's presence is what's in focus. God being there amongst his people is what's in focus. And that's what's depicted with these lampstands and the bread. Excuse me. So then when we get to verses 10 through 16, we have a case. There's blasphemy, and it just says against the name. They don't really come out and say, Jehovah or Adonai or what exactly this person was. But basically this woman's son blasphemed the name, there in verse 11, and cursed. They brought him to Moses. What do we do here? We clearly think he broke God's word, taking the name of the Lord in vain. Well, what should it be? Because they put him into custody until the will of the Lord should be clear to them. And, well, what did it come back as? Well, then he should be put to death, there in verse 16. And they were to stone him. So they bring him out of the camp, the one who cursed, and let those who heard him lay their hands on his head. All the congregation stone him, and speak to the people of Israel, saying, whoever curses his God shall bear his sin. Whoever blasphemes the name of the Lord shall surely be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him, the sojourner, the traveler, as well as the native, when he blasphemes the name, shall be put to death. So it's like, whoa, that's really stiff. I mean, if we did that today, I don't know how many people would be left alive. I think our population would decrease significantly because so many people on such a regular occasion blaspheme the name of God, whether it's the sojourner or the Christian themselves. A lot of Christians, unfortunately, live very secularly and talk that way, and that's a shame. Because here in the Old Testament, again, as part of their textbook, as part of their law, they're taught the reverence and the holiness to be had for the name of God itself. Not just God. We learned earlier in the previous chapters about the ceremonies of God, the priesthood, the sacrifice. Oh, well, yeah, of course they represent God. And oh, yeah, priest standing before God and representing. Yeah, of course he has to be clean. Of course he has to be holy. And who would offer to God a sacrifice that's a lamb with a disease or a broken leg? Boy, what a poor sacrifice that would be. But here, even the name of God is simply, I say simply, but in a very, we would say in our day and age, is very insignificant sin, maybe. It's just, oops, my tongue slipped or something to that effect. Or God saved me knowing I cursed, and, he just saves me and loves me the way I am. It's like, no. Here's someone within the camp of Israel, and to bring him out and stone him to death because he profaned and blasphemed the name of God. That we would have such a reverence for God and his name in our day and age, but unfortunately we don't. And that then leads, I guess you could say, into the further case law of verses 17 to the end through 23 there. Life for life. It's eye for an eye. You take someone's human life, well, you're to be put to death. You take an animal's life, well, you have to make good for it. You have to pay what its value is, like what it would have been in a substitution or a trade or some sort. You have to make good. Fracture for fracture. You did something that broke my arm. So you're going to break your arm. You did something that put out my eye. I'll put out your eye. Tooth for tooth. Same thing. The same rules then also for the native as for the people sojourning or traveling, depending on the translation you're reading, through your land. Now, what about this? In a school sense, what is God teaching them here? Well, this is civil law. This is looking at the law from a civil law standpoint. How do you deter these things from happening? Well, by retrofitting them, you could say, with a punishment that not only look after the welfare of others, but if you don't and you feel like you're going to be malicious, know that there's going to be the exacting penalty back to you. And we see that, you're going to see that in Judges and some of the other books of the Bible. Later with Joshua and some of the other families that we'll look at as you read through the Bible, that it's like the penalties that God exacts from different people who are either persecuting Israel or even some of the Israelites themselves ends up being a one-to-one of what they were doing. And it's a civil law penalty to deter sin. It keeps us in check. If you knew that for whatever sin you committed, it was going to be committed back to you, well, you would probably stop and think twice. But that's what is being taught to them here in these rules. Now, this brings up the question, though, what about when God overturns this, when Jesus says later in Matthew 5, he says, well, but just turn the other cheek. If someone hits you, strikes you on the right cheek, well, turn him the left one also. Or maybe I have the left and right backwards there. I don't remember, but that same kind of principle. What is Jesus getting at here? Is he saying, well, to heck with all the law, to heck with penalties for sin? We don't need that kind of thing anymore. No, he's not doing away with the equitable principle of penalties for sin, of having civil laws that punish sin. He's looking at it from the standpoint, or presenting it from the standpoint of religious persecution versus social justice. In a social justice context, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But Jesus is saying in a religious persecution aspect, well, why not suffer for righteousness' sake? Why exact your penalty on them when they already face a harsher one for going up against God and his people? Because there's a covenant principle already in effect, as exemplified or told to, it's more expounded, I guess you could say, in Abraham. I will bless those who bless you, but I will curse those who curse you. So someone coming up against you and persecuting you religiously, they're already staring down the barrel of God's vengeance. It says God, whoa, you're my people, you're my church, my holy ones, my royal nation, my priesthood, and I'm not going to let people treat you that way. You get persecuted, God says, I will be the one who takes the vengeance. You don't need to do that. You don't need to come at them with the normal civil penalties. You don't need to enact those in a religious persecution type of sense. I will do that. Now, if it's civil, on the other hand, well, yeah, we should hold people accountable, not forgive every single thing under the sun and just say, well, I'm a Christian, so I'm just going to forgive everybody of everything they ever do to me. Like, no, I'm going to hold people accountable for what they do to me, to my family, to my car, to my house, whatever. I'm going to abide by the laws of the land and see that those things are done, because those things are against sin, stand for holiness, righteousness, and justice, things that also represent Christ. And I'm going to see that those things are maintained to try to curb sin in this life, to curb people from performing such things. Now, if they want to do those in a persecution type of way, persecuting me for being a Christian, well, those kinds of things I probably very much will just let slide. Oh, you don't like, I don't know, something about me for what I said about Christ, and so you're going to fling mud at me or something to that effect. Okay, I'll just wash it off later. It's worth it to be counted or hated on God's behalf. I'm not going to take vengeance for that. So there's a distinction there to be had, an equitable principle, we would say, in the law of God on how we look at civil laws versus religious persecution and things like those types of principles. So I hope that helps. If you have any questions, maybe I muddied the water there for you a bit. Maybe I cleared things up. I don't know. But if not, if you have questions, comments, thoughts, leave those in the comments below. I'll try to get to those, or we'll do another follow-up video on this chapter to try to address those. But for now, God bless, take care, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.